Thank you, Paula. So this morning I bring you a sermon for Creation Sunday and a sermon for Harvest and a sermon about three people who were healed by Jesus. But there's one big picture here, and just in case you're about to switch off and not listen to anything else I say this morning, here it is. You need to remember this one point. Jesus has authority over creation. He acts to bring restoration. Jesus has authority over creation. He acts to bring restoration. Now, it will help you, and it will certainly help me to have Matthew 8 open. That's page 972 in the Bibles in front of you. Let's start by just noticing some things about our passage. All three of the people Jesus heals are outsiders. So the first is a man with leprosy, verse 2, and the little footnote there tells you that the Bible uses that word to mean someone who could have a whole range of skin conditions. It doesn't have to be leprosy, but he was definitely unclean. He wouldn't have been able to worship at the Jerusalem temple. The second person is a centurion's servant, a Gentile, so also outside God's people. The third is a woman, Peter's mother-in-law, verse 14. Women were barred from temple worship as well. So Jesus heals three outsiders. And this is especially significant because this is the first account of anything after the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus has been talking about who's blessed in God's kingdom, about the poor, those who mourn, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and so on. And now he's showing what he's going to do about it. He's showing that he's here for the outsider. And the way Jesus heals each one is different, and this is something you see right across all of the healings in the New Testament. None is identical. He has no set way of doing things. Jesus deals with the individual in front of him. So we start then in verses 1 to 4 with the man with leprosy, who says, verse 2, "Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean." Notice he doesn't say you can make me well. He says, you can make me clean. The man is less interested in being well than he is in being restored to the community, the worshipping community. That's what he wants. He wants to be clean. And Jesus never turns anybody away. And so he says, verse 3, "I am willing, be clean." And immediately he was cured of his leprosy. When Jesus touches the man, of course, he makes himself unclean. So he takes the man's uncleanliness on himself. The man becomes clean, Jesus becomes unclean. And that's a little picture of the gospel right there. Your sins get taken away when Jesus dies on the cross and you are clean. And verse 4, Jesus sends him straight to the priest. The priest is the only person who can declare him officially clean. So for the man with leprosy, Jesus brings healing, but most importantly, Jesus brings restoration. Restoration to God's worshipping people. So then, Jesus heals a man who comes to him and asks to be clean. And next, Jesus heals someone who he never actually meets. Verse 5, when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home, paralyzed and in terrible suffering." And Jesus says, "Look, I'll go and heal him." But verse 8, the centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." Jesus is amazed by the faith of this Gentile. So amazed that he actually warns his listeners that they risk being left outside the kingdom in favour of the faithful outsiders. Verse 12. Then verse 13, Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, it will be done for you just as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that very hour. Without ever meeting the servant, without even setting foot in his house, Jesus brings healing. So Jesus demonstrates his authority over illness by healing from a distance. And then Jesus arrives home, and verse 14, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. Just two things to notice here. First, Peter has a mother-in-law, so he had a wife. It would have been normal culturally for most, if not all, of the disciples to be family men. Second, a fever would have been very serious in those days, and actually right up until relatively recently with the introduction of penicillin, having a fever routinely proved fatal. And again, when Jesus takes her hand, he becomes unclean, verse 15. But she's better straight away, and she got up and began to wait on him. I love that picture. She gets up from her sickbed and makes everyone a cup of tea. Good on her, that's what I say. So much for our three healings. What has any of this got to do with Creation Sunday or with harvest? There's nothing here about flora and fauna, nothing here or actually anywhere in the Bible about the climate crisis or net zero. Well, when Jesus heals people, he restores creation to how it should be. Sickness isn't part of God's good plan for people. It came into the world at the fall when people decided to turn our backs on God and go our own way. So when God heals people, even today, he is restoring creation to its ideal state for that person. So then, should Christians just ignore environmentalism and just pray for God's restoration of creation when we're faced with the destruction of rainforests or mass extinction or pollution? Should we be activists when God actually brings restoration with a word? Well, I think we should be active. We should pray and be active. It's not one or the other, is it? Because God doesn't just choose to bring restoration to creation supernaturally. He uses his people to change things too. And that's been the case when it comes to all kinds of social justice causes. Slavery wasn't abolished because of a chain of miracles, because people prayed. It was decades of hard graft by faithful Christian people who believed in justice. We don't have universally available education and healthcare in this country through divine intervention. We have them because Christian people saw the need for those things to be available to everyone and helped to make them happen. And it was there on that video, wasn't it? Tear Fund didn't just pray for that community and sort of hope that things would get better. They got stuck in. And they didn't say, the climate crisis has ruined our lives and it's all hopeless, which is so much of the narrative in the world. And if you talk to our young people, that it's a hopeless narrative very often, that we can't change anything, it's all going to rack and ruin. They said, actually, this is a new reality, let's invest in that and figure it out and find some solutions. The evidence is there. When communities get together and commit to making a difference, creation can be restored. And that's beginning to happen in places all over the world, from the hillsides of Nepal. But in Brazil, there's a project aiming to restore 30,000 hectares of forest. Now, I don't know 1 hectare from another. My geography's not amazing. That's 73 million trees. 73 million trees being restored in Brazil. When scientists realized in the 1980s that the ozone layer was being destroyed by polluting chemicals, there was a worldwide campaign and governments got together and banned those chemicals. And now the ozone layer is recovering, and in about 30 years' time, scientists predict it'll be back to normal. When I was a child, you couldn't recycle your waste. You reuse things or you chuck them away. But now the UK recycles 390,000 tonnes of plastic every year. That only happens because the government and councils and people put in place recycling, and we rinse out our things and we squash them down and we put them in the right box and we get really confused and we put the bins out and they take them. It's a bit of everything, isn't it? Government acting, we act, we care, we do something. So God's work of restoration happens through his people. And that's what the Eco Church programme is about. Along with hundreds of other churches, St Mary of Bethany has changed the way we do a lot of our church life. So we speak about creation and the environment regularly. We use cleaning products as a church which are better for the environment. We save as much energy as we can. This summer we renewed the loft insulation in our hall. This is a big old building, so we can't do everything we would like to. But having better insulation in the bits that we can do something about makes a really big difference. It'll save us money, but also it'll save us energy. And because of what we've done and what we've committed to do, we've got a Silver Eco Church Award. That's something only a handful of local churches have managed. And if you've never spotted it, it is a little plaque that's just on our door outside, as you walk in by the door. Have a look. If you've never seen it, it is a marvellous thing, a Silver Eco Church Award. It's something to celebrate as a church. What we do as a church community makes a difference within this building on our premises. But so does what each of us does, and we will multiply our impact if all of us do our bit. The products we use at church are one thing, but what we use in the 100 or so households that we have is going to make a much bigger difference, isn't it? We can look after our garden here and use the right stuff on it and make it better for wildlife. But if all of us look after our gardens, that's acres and acres of land that we're making a difference on, a much, much bigger impact. And in doing all this, it's vital that we encourage our government and our local government to go further too. It's been noticeable that in the last few years, the amount of plastic packaging has reduced. Much more of it is becoming recyclable. A lot of the soft plastic packaging now is recyclable, but you have to take it somewhere. You have to take it to the supermarket. But all of it is still crazy. There's still far too much of it. Many of the houses in the UK are old, aren't they? But there's hardly any help for less well-off people to insulate them better. It would be fairly straightforward for the government to introduce something so that when you move house, there's some help for making changes. Most people do most work on their house within 2 years of moving in. Bit of a nudge, help with stamp duty, something. Doesn't take much imagination. There are so few plastic recycling plants in the UK that tons of plastic ends up being destroyed or shipped abroad when it could be recycled here if we have the facilities. So, as well as perhaps thinking about one thing you could do practically this autumn to make a difference to creation, maybe think about one cause that you could commit to campaigning about. Let the council know you care. Contact your MP. When MPs get emails or letters written personally by constituents, they work from the assumption that their view counts for 10,000 people. So when you represent something, you are representing 10,000 people. Just think about that. Writing one email. They take your views seriously. Jesus' work of restoration happens through his people. Just as Jesus brings healing to 3 very different people who are outside his worshipping community, Jesus works through his people to bring restoration to our world. That is just as true when you give to charity old clothes you don't need, when you change your product choices to use less plastic, or when you campaign to reduce pollution or save wildlife, when you turn your thermostat down and put on an extra jumper. When you do these things alongside your prayer and your giving, you bring Jesus' work of restoration to our planet. In his healings, Jesus demonstrates his commitment to restore the outsiders, to bring unexpected people into his kingdom. This Creation Sunday, we remember the God of the harvest, the one who gives us everything we need. So commit to the outsider and to Christ's work of restoration in your own life and in other people's. Let's pray.